Welcome back to The Mature Male. I'm your host, Wes, and today's topic is humility. We'll be discussing what true humility is, why it matters for men, and practical paths to be able to be humble, as well as what that looks like in community through accountability. I want to start with a quote from Father Richard Rohr, who says, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less." So let's dive in. Understanding true humility. The Latin root for the word humility is humus, which means to be grounded or to be earth. This is a very different way from how we traditionally see humility, which is often confused with meekness, selflessness, those kind of words. It is simply the ability to be grounded in reality. So how does that shape our understanding of humility? Let's start with the fact that the word humility and the word humiliation share the same Latin root. I want to discuss how humiliation is a key component of humility. When we think about the word humility, there's a phrase that's often used, "You were humbled." That humbled me. And we don't think too much about the correlation here, but usually when we become humbled, it's because we are humiliated in a sense. And this aligns with the traditional masculine journey with rites of passage, where the male has to start off in his prideful state thinking he is stronger than he is. So what brings a man down to reality to help him realign and become aware of where he actually is? A wound. Each of us has a core wound that is sacred. It's essential for us to be humiliated. Maybe this was a loss of a job, or being rejected by a date, or experiencing some sort of lessening of a situation. And where many of us go wrong is we see the wounding, the setback, the shortcoming, the failure as a reflection of who we are. Now that means I'm weak, I'm a failure. Instead of seeing it as a necessary step in the process of becoming humble. If you have not often failed, you avoid failure, or you see failure and wounding as a negative thing, you are prideful. You are living in a world that reflects a false sense of strength, certainty, power that feels good, but is not rooted in reality. When we are humiliated, when we are humbled, it brings us back to reality, because life is painful. It's uncertain. We are not guaranteed anything. But we can often live in this world of success and ego and accomplishment, and it keeps us from learning. A further reflection from Father Rohr on this is that oftentimes success does not teach us much. It's actually our failures, the wounding, the negative things that happen to us and brings us to our knees that teach us the most. We want to incorporate a habit of asking to be humiliated, which is a crazy thing to ask upon first hearing it. But as we go through, hopefully you will start to see that as an essential gateway to being a truly humble person. It never feels good. We wouldn't wish it upon anyone, but somehow we're thankful for it once we go through it. That great wounding, that humiliation that brings us down to reality. And historically, this was a virtue. The average man had humility at his core as an essential component of who he is. But modern day, we have succumbed to being weak men. I'm not doing this whole toxic, "Oh, you got to be strong. You got to make sure to never question things and be the head of the household and make all the right decisions and never mess up." That's not what I'm getting at all. I think in general, on both ideological extreme ends of the spectrum, on one side, we have succumbed to emotions, abstract definitions, and a overly feminized version of being a man. And on the other side, just as weak and bad, we have heightened this sense of heroism and tried to shut off our emotions, only use logic and reason, and ignore the care and love that we need to have for ourselves and the world that we live in. Both these are grounded in weakness because neither show a sign of being humiliated. When we are humiliated, we can admit that we're wrong. We can admit that someone else has something to say that we may need to hear as truth. We can be open and accepting that we're often not going to agree with others, but the point is that we connect, and we should know that we don't know it all. We're not even close. By definition, we will infinitely not know more than what we know. Yet, we walk around as a male species spouting off certainty, like this is the truth, this is the way, and this is how we do things. When historically, men would value the understanding of humility as a true virtue that is essential. It's not optional. If you want to be a role model, someone that others looks to, then you need humility. And this understanding of humility helps break down what is true and what is false. Pride is a self-constructed illusion that we live in that pumps up our ego, affirms the worst parts of ourselves, and ignores the complexities and pains of life. Humility grounds us in reality, realizes life is not about us, and that there's more to the world than what we see. It tells us what is true and what is false. When we are humbled, we come to terms with life as it is, not as we think it is. It is not self-doubt, which is really an insecurity or a fear. That self-doubt is actually pride. It's a false sense of doubting the real. What humility is an accurate self-assessment of who you are and who you're not. It's knowing your limits and your strengths. Humility is not minimizing yourself as a person, as the quote said at the beginning of the video. It is being grounded in the reality of what you are good at, what you thrive in, what you've succeeded in, what you have strengths in, and knowing your limits. The wound is not in and of itself a failure, a shortcoming, but it is a representation of the need to be lowered, because pride elevates you beyond reality where you need to be and hyperinflates your sense of importance. The wound is often a temporary failure, setback, shortcoming, loss. But on an identity level, the wound is not just that. Humility teaches us to stand, but in truth, we are grounded with the feet of our lives in reality. We are not hyperinflated, but nor do we beat ourselves up and push ourselves below bottom. That's also a false sense of humility. Oh, I'm nothing. It's not about me. Forget about me and my needs. That's also very toxic. You matter. Your needs matter. And if you feel like you are not worth being cared for and looked after and considered, that's not humility. Always putting others first is toxic. It'll kill you. And it is a form of pride. On the other side, to think that you are not important enough to do those things, to receive the care that you deserve, is prideful. It's a hypo-deflated view of yourself. So Father Rohr breaks down humility into the true self and the false self. The true self is soul growth. The false self is ego protection. Our masculine journey requires surrender. That is the key characteristic for how someone can start to become humble. The humiliation requires a surrender. You either surrender to the moment, realizing you are not in control, you are not powerful, you are not important as you think you are. That surrender is really an act of trust. Or you can resist, double down, and become more egotistical and prideful and ignore the humility that you could gain through surrender. But why is surrender so hard for us? This is seen in a classic example of how men really struggle with admitting they're wrong. Not me, of course. I always admit it when I'm wrong. We have trouble even acknowledging a wrongdoing or thinking because our pride tells us we're threatened. If I admit I'm wrong, then that shows I'm weak, or I don't know what I'm talking about, or I can't be trusted. When in fact, it's the very opposite. When you admit you're wrong, when you surrender, you are more trustworthy, more humble, more grounded in reality, more wise. Our ability to own up to our faults or our unideal responses, or really reactions to our woundings, is humility. So why does this matter for men? Personal growth does not happen without humility. Because humility starts in a position of realizing you need others' help. You need others' guidance. You need others to help show you the way. If you cannot start in a place of surrender and know that, you will not grow. It will be a false, self-imposed sense of growth that actually leads you to become a more narcissistic, prideful, and closed-off person. Having humility gives you a growth mindset, which is a great book by Carol Dweck. Check it out. It breaks the ego defenses. It no longer has a sense of needing to be right. Why do we hold so strongly for the need to be right? Because it feels good. It feels powerful. We feel in control. But it doesn't lead us into deeper connection, wisdom, and understanding of ourselves and those we are in relationship with. Humility enables vulnerability. Going back to the wound in the male rites of passage, that wounding is important because it exposes our vulnerability. It shows us we are not bulletproof, that we are susceptible to pain and suffering will come in our lives and bring us to our knees. So how do we respond? And this is why men struggle so greatly with loss and pain and suffering. We don't express the true grief and sadness and confusion and weakness that we experience because we don't trust others. We think we have to be something we're not. But the humility allows us to be vulnerable in a way that sees it as a strength. It says that vulnerability is a sign of security because you feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And that through being vulnerable, it opens up the ability to receive the help and love and care that you deserve. If you stay shut off, if you are not vulnerable, first with yourself, but with others, you will never get to the place you want to get, nor receive what you need to because you are shut off. Humility welcomes constructive criticism. How often do we receive feedback and we over-personalize it? Well, that's just not true, or I didn't mean that, or you don't know what you're talking about. We immediately get defensive. But what if we were able to develop humility in a way that trusted the constructive criticism as the exact truth we least want to hear but most need to? That someone else's reflection of reality. The truth hurts, but it sets us free. How can we start to take things less personally, get offended less? You know, it's interesting. We'll never call it that. We use words like frustration and aggravation. We often blame others and scapegoat and put it back on them. Yeah, well, you do this. We say these things out of a need to defend ourselves. We get defensive. When humility opens the door for us to be weak, vulnerable, exposed, but not in a shameful way. That is our ultimate fear, that we will receive shame from others or we will feel shameful about ourselves. But what if we were proud to be humble? That changes the definition of proud, by the way. It moves from someone who can never be wrong, who's not living in reality, to a true sense of dignity, respect, and honor for ourselves enough to open ourselves up to constructive criticism or feedback, because ultimately that makes us better. Jordan Peterson says, listen to someone as if they have something to say that you don't know, but need to. Having the ability to be open to receiving truth that you didn't come up with is vital to progress. Humility also helps us see mistakes as a lesson and a path forward. Instead of beating ourselves up, becoming flabbergasted on how we could make such mistakes, or ignoring mistakes and say, well, I didn't do that. That wasn't a problem. That's no big deal. Instead of minimizing the mistakes, what if we saw them as the very essential gateway to freedom, to wisdom? Humility allows us to do that. The most humble people in life have failed the most, but they haven't internalized the failure as a value judgment, nor over-identified with it as being a failure. They see mistakes as something that is natural and encouraged because it means you're trying, you're taking a risk, you're going out in the world and you're being vulnerable in a effective, safe manner that makes you a better person. Every time we get humiliated or humbled, and that's what happens with mistakes because we do it wrong, it's an opportunity for us to see it as a recalibration, a refocus, a reframe that brings us back to reality. And sometimes we don't want to see reality as it is because it's too painful, it's too dark, it's too depressing. And that's understandable. That's why you can see me for therapy. But we have to face it anyway. We have to see life as it is, not as we wish it was. We need to start seeing mistakes as a welcomed gateway to walk the path that we are always made to. If we cannot do that, we will stay stunted in our growth. We will continue to throw tantrums, blame other people, gaslight, scapegoat, and we become narcissistic where life is about us. We can become free to be able to not enjoy mistakes because they still are painful. They don't feel good, but to see them in a positive light. So let's talk about how we can become humble through relationships. So the first component is creating a trust builder. Humility often happens in social environments, whether it's with one person or a group. Of course, we can be humbled on our own, but usually the most humiliating, embarrassing, weak, wounded parts of our life involve other people. On the flip side, if we want to grow in humility, it's going to involve other people. So the first step is having some sort of accountability. This allows you to be accounted for, that your life is to be one of taken stock of and reflected on and refined. Having a partner, a spouse, a best friend who you can continually look to help you understand how well you are progressing in life, but in particular in humility. The way that you do this is to think through these questions. Where am I most resistant to being humbled? What areas, if I was to be humiliated in, would that create the most fear? How can I start to welcome that fear and that humiliation as a sign of growth? An example would be you most fear messing up at work because if you mess up at work, then that means you are not trusted and that ultimately you're going to get fired because you're not good at your job. You want to build up the trust to be able to see messing up at work as the path to being a better worker, to build trust in your job security, and that calculated or learn from mistakes oftentimes aren't worth losing a job over. And even if they are, there's a lesson in there. This allows you to create genuine connection. Then you have an opportunity maybe to speak with your boss and tell him or her how you're feeling. Hey, I just want to say, I appreciate your trust. And I feel that when I'm working on this project, I'm scared to mess up or do it wrong because I think you'll think less of me and then I'm scared of getting fired. That's a vulnerable thing to say. One would say, why would you say that? You need to be certain. You need to reinforce your skills and abilities. But actually, it's an invitation to connection. And if your boss is a healthy person, they'll receive that and say, oh no, don't think that. I'm here for you. I'm here to support you. You're going to make mistakes. Trust me, I've been in your position before. I know how it is. Trust the process. Make the mistakes, learn from them, and move on. And let me know if you continue to feel like that. Humility reduces defensive reactions when we are accountable because we are safe enough to trust someone and not see what they say as a threat. That's why we get defensive, because we see the critique, the criticism, the feedback, the insight someone said, the thing that we missed that we feel like we should have gotten or known. It lets our guard down. It disarms us, and we can receive in a way that doesn't make us defensive. It makes us better. Doing this in relationships makes space for others. When we are less defensive with ourselves, less hard on ourselves, and we welcome mistakes, shortcomings, and woundings as a natural part of life, we do the same for others. We have empathy. Someone else messes up, someone else does us wrong, someone else falls short, and we can say, hey, I get it. We can have that empathy. I know what it's like to feel bad, to feel embarrassed, to feel shameful. And me trying to punish you or teach you a lesson by nagging or talking at you is not going to go far. Many men love to teach a lesson. Well, you should have done this. I can't believe that you didn't do this. This is the right thing to do. Goes off on some generic academic diatribe that's not helpful. Make space for others to be where they're at. This also transforms conflicts. When you welcome humility, it will allow you to see conflict not as a threat, but an invitation to connection. That person cares enough about you to tell you the truth, even though it's hard, because the truth is what makes you better. It might not be what you want to hear, but it might be what you need to hear. It strengthens connections when we can be humiliated in front of others, when we can expose our weaknesses, because instead of fearing the reality of being rejected, denied, ignored, or shamed, we actually receive acceptance, love, belonging, being cherished. It changes our narrative of how we can show up as a humble person in a relationship. So what is the modern crisis here for men? Why do we not hold humility as a core virtue? Well, there are false power structures at play. That has always been the case, but especially in today's world, we elevate ourselves to a degree that we do not need to, and that is not best for us. Our insecurity breeds a sense of arrogance. I don't need anyone. I don't need help. I don't need to hear that. I don't need you to do that. We're very quick to say everything we don't need or want. That defensiveness creates an isolation. We think that we have to power through it, that we have to overcome, that if it doesn't happen on our watch, then it's going to fail. It's not going to go well. Or maybe something negative happens, a wounding like a death or a job loss. And instead of sitting in that grief and letting others support us and love us and us reflecting on what that means to us, we feel like we have to just put life on our back, carry that burden, and keep going. We don't feel like we have time to slow down, time to process, time to be weak, time to express what we're really feeling. That is a lot of weight you were not meant to carry. Stop. Take it off. Let it go. Let it roll off your shoulders. But we become addicted to being hyperheroes. And that comes from a lot of cultural messaging. The classic, boys don't cry. Men aren't as emotional as women. They don't share their feelings. Have you ever been in a male group hanging out? Very rarely is the talk about feelings and the experience of your week from that perspective. It's about the game, the politics, the stats. We stay so rational and logical. We got to allow ourselves to go deep here into our heart. It's exhausting keeping up with appearances. To try to be someone you're not is exhausting. Be yourself. It is normal to be weak, to need help. Have humility. Stop acting like you don't need people. You do. What are some practical paths to humility? You can try daily practices of morning intent setting. So this would be settling in, coming to terms with the priority of the day and asking yourself, how do I want to show up to today? How can I be understanding and patient, compassionate, empathetic, first with myself and with others? Doesn't matter what it is. When someone gives me feedback, how can I take a few deep breaths, not raise my shoulders and get defensive and say, you don't know what you're talking about? How can we stay in a grounded? Then in the evening, reflect. How did the day go? I received feedback at work. I got a little impatient or defensive, or my wife called me out on doing something wrong and I tried to then blame her for something. Okay, those are areas where I wasn't so humble. Or maybe the reverse. Maybe there was a time where someone shared something with you and you received it well. You took it and you implemented it in your life. Great. You should be proud of that. Have a feedback seeking ritual, not just personally, but find someone else. Because when we expose, when we confess, when we allow ourselves to be subject to feedback from someone else, that's a sign of humility. It's a sign of growth. It's a sign of progress. This usually happens in marriages, but certainly can happen in whoever you most trust or feel safe with, secure, that has your best interest, who you have the best chance of receiving the hardest news from. Make it a practice every week to get feedback, even from work. Instead of waiting until your 6-month review, say to your boss every month, Can we sit down? I want to know how I'm doing, where I can improve, where I can get better, what I'm missing, where my weaknesses are that I need to address and own up to. It feels uncomfortable and burdensome at first, but then it'll free you up. You will feel so invigorated when you can do that. Then there's the power of asking questions. How can I get better? How can I improve? What areas can I grow in? When you're asking a question, it reflects the need and desire to seek truth. Because if you already have the answer, you don't need to ask the question. How many of us walk around thinking we know all the answers? I'm good. I know. We're all set. No need to go into that. No need to explain. No need to read this. No need to listen to that. We don't know. What we don't know far outweighs what we know. Have the humility to constantly be asking questions. Have the beginner's mindset. That's from a book, Shunryu Suzuki, really good, Beginner's Mind. Its principle is to always act like you're a beginner. You will never arrive. You will always have the ability to be a lifelong learner. Then having genuine apologies is a practice. Truly and genuinely saying, I'm sorry. We have to cough it up most of the time. What if we practice to where we could effectively apologize right when we realize we're wrong? We say it instead of withholding love from someone or connection, and we become stubborn, we deny, we deflect, we defend. Don't do those things. When you are wrong, just admit you're wrong. When you normalize being wrong, you will apologize a lot sooner, more sincerely, and more effectively in a way that leads you to connection instead of disconnection and isolation. When you apologize, you reflect the understanding of reality because you are admitting that your action or thought or words did not align with reality, what reality needed to be, what the truth needed to be. You fell short, and admitting that is powerful. So here's a practice that you can try, call it the listening practice. So it starts with a 2-to-1 ratio. You listen twice as much as you speak. To have true humility, again, to know what you don't know far outweighs what you know, then you realize the whole 2 ears, 1 mouth thing. Listen twice as much as you speak. Have curiosity before judgment. Instead of assuming something, making a judgmental statement that is done out of certainty, have curiosity. Really? Tell me more. What did you mean by that? Hey, I was interested when you say that. Can you tell me what that means? Have body cues for attention. Show that your shoulders are lowered. Your face is not tense. It looks insightful and engaged and curious. And you have an open stance. When we try to defend ourselves, we physically show that. We cross our arms. We furrow our brows. We become closed off and we come, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm right. This right here shows I am wrong. Open up. Be real. This is a true reflection of being wrong, being open to the truth as a life-giving experience instead of something to avoid as a threat. Try to restate before you respond. I think if I heard you right, that's what you said. Instead of immediately just waiting for someone to finish talking, okay, I'm just going to jump in. We can also practice this not just through listening, but through service, anonymous good deeds, praise redirecting, volunteer work. And if someone gives you the credit, say, oh, thanks so much. You know what? So-and-so also did an amazing job on that. Supporting other successes, giving people shout outs and testimonies, highlighting them, elevating who they are, finding joy in other people's victories. Oh my gosh, congrats. That's amazing, man. Great job. How often do we encourage our brothers when we go through something? That leads me to my last point of community and accountability. The first step is finding teachers. Find people who are more humble than you to help show you how to be more. It's important to find those who are further along on the journey, who can be a trusted, wise, reflective guide to show you where you may be falling short and where you can grow. Oftentimes we find this at work, but in a very shallow sense, it can feel more like a practical exchange. But having a mentor is more of a deep relational, reciprocal giving and receiving. You want to ask yourself, how do I find someone that is truly humble? They live a humble life that can be someone that gives me true guidance to grow. Brotherhood is important, having friends that are safe spaces for truth. Again, how often do male friendships just talk about the game? But you're living a real life. You have problems in your relationship, in your work. You have anxieties, fears, depression, and this sense of uncertainty and insecurities. Where is there a space among brothers, among friends to share that? Start developing the humility to normalize humiliation among each other, instead of using it as a competition to one up each other, or to say everything that's going right, or to prove another friend wrong, or to just bully each other or joke instead of truly connect. You want to find friends that will challenge you and support you, and strike that balance. I'm calling out the best in you. There's more in you. You can do better. If you continue to own up to this, you can progress. And you're enough as you are. Slow down. Trust the process. Be where you're at. It's okay. And you can share practices with each other. To conclude, here are some signs of growth when you are becoming a humble person. Peace replaces defensiveness. Questions replace certainty. Connection deepens. Criticism hurts less. Example is podcaster Tim Ferriss, who made this transformation. He talks about it in his book, Tools of the Titans. Highly recommend. He goes on this journey from achievement focus, where he was always aiming to accomplish, to do the next thing, to balance focus, to saying, I want to be a lifelong learner. And his humility improved the way that he interviewed people, his relationships. And he talks about how he used specific practices like meditation and asking questions, ones that we mentioned previously, to be able to grow in this sense of humility. He talks about some key turning points that taught him humility, that included being humiliated to a degree and allowing his own wounding to lead him to a deeper sense of need and openness and curiosity. This balance of strength and openness. Strength is, I'm moving forward in a confidence of who I am, and I'm not as open. I'm acting out of a healthy closed offness, which is working out of my strengths, but I'm also maintaining this open stance to receive truth, insight, and guidance as I move forward in my strengths. The call to action here is to try one of the practices I previously mentioned above and journal about it. How did it go? How was that experience for you? We talked about the true definition of humility, how it's rooted in reality, how it shares a correlation with the need to be humiliated. It shows us what's true, what's false. We went through Father Rohr's view of the true and false self and what that's like in the masculine journey of needing to be wounded, and reveals reality to us. Then we moved into talking about why humility matters for men, how we can personally grow, how this is acted out in relationships through trust building, genuine connection, making space for others, and empathy, and the modern crisis we're in, why most of us men struggle with being humble, the reasons for that, and how we can address those. Then moving into a time of talking through the practical paths to humility, setting intentions, having reflections, feedback, asking questions, through listening practices, being of service to others, and having a community and accountability through other brothers and mentors, people who are walking beside you, people who are walking in front of you that you can look to. And all these things show that you are a humble and wise person. Learn to be a humble man. Do the steps it takes to be humble. See it as a core virtue and component of maturing as a man, and practice these things. Thanks for listening today. That's it for me. I'll see you next time.